Hello everyone, and thank you so much for engaging with this PowerPoint about mentoring and the University of Worcester partnership. My name is Catherine Clutterbuck and I'm the Primary Placements Manager here at the University. I've included my email address there on the slide for you in case you need to get in touch. This PowerPoint will go over many of the aspects of mentoring that lots of you will be familiar with if you've worked with us before. But there's also a voiceover just to go through some of the changes and some of the ways that we're trying to work with schools during the period of school closures and throughout the coronavirus pandemic in order to ensure that our trainees can continue to engage with school and to continue to make progress towards the teacher standards. So I just want to start by sharing the aims of this training with you. You can see them there on the screen, but really the most important part of this particular training is being able to talk to you about how you can support our trainees whilst they're meeting the teacher standards, whilst schools are closed or whilst trainees are needing to work remotely. We're really keen on working flexibly with you and our trainees being part of your school workforce. I'm going to go through some ideas and some suggestions that we've also shared with the trainees so that they can keep their proactive nature to actually supporting their own progress, but just to give you some of those ideas so that if you do find ourselves in a situation where trainees are supporting remotely or during a period of school closure, we're all clear on exactly how they can still make progress towards the standards. The first thing I wanted to talk to you about was the mentoring standards. We want to hold the mentoring standards at the heart of our training, at the heart of what we do as mentors. So the first one is about establishing trusting relationships, modelling high standards of practice and empathising with the challenges that a trainee faces. So where appropriate, we'd like you to really try to use appropriate challenge to encourage the trainees to reflect on their practice. Supporting the trainees with being able to do that, empathising with the fact that they may not have significant experience with their reflective skills, and talking to them about the things to prioritise as part of their reflections. Being approachable, making time with the trainee, prioritising meetings and discussions with them so that they feel they've got you there as that supportive person and you're able to spend some time to build those trusting relationships so that the trainee will seek out your advice and go with it. So the second one is about supporting trainees to develop their teaching practice in order to set high expectations and to meet the needs of all pupils. So you can do this in school by supporting them in developing effective approaches to planning, teaching and assessment. When trainees are out on their first school experience, they will have the University of Worcester planning format that they use, which we've designed to support them with effective approaches to planning. As they start to move away from that in SE2 and SE3 using school planning systems, it's about supporting them to develop their own effective system. Talking to them about that cycle of planning, teaching and assessment and adapting plans as they're going along, reflecting on those lessons and reflecting on the progress of the pupils in the class. Giving constructive and clear, timely feedback on lesson observations. So talking to students about their lessons that you've observed in a timely manner so that they're able to remember what's happened and remember clearly the progress that children have made. Making that constructive feedback really clear to students, being clear about what they're going to start to develop, what they're going to be working on, what any areas of target are going to be. And also brokering opportunities for trainees to observe best practice. So talking to trainees about seeking opportunities in school to go and look at different teachers teach. Obviously, we're aware at the moment there may be some challenges with that, some difficulties with enabling students to go and observe teachers outside of their class teacher bubble. That's absolutely fine, we understand that. Some settings you may have different approaches and different policies that do enable trainees to be able to observe best practice from different teachers. The third mentoring standard is about inducting the trainee into the professional norms and values and helping them to understand the importance of the role and responsibility of teachers in society. It's just about supporting them with that development of part 2 of the teacher standards. And sometimes in school situations can crop up that students can find really challenging, related to internal school politics, relations with other teachers and colleagues, and getting used to working in such a collaborative way. So you can support them in school by helping them resolve in school issues or doing so on their behalf where they lack the confidence or experience to do so themselves. And think about the position and the stage of their journey that they're on in becoming a teacher when knowing how much to support to give there and what kind of conversation you might have with a student. And the fourth and final mentor standard is about continuing to develop your own professional knowledge, skills and understanding as a mentor. And so spending a bit of your time developing a good working relationship within the partnership, coming to things like our steering committee, talking to us and engaging with us on the processes and practices that we have in school, having those strong relationships with the school experience tutors that are visiting your school from the university, and trying to ensure a bit of consistency by working with other mentors, spending time looking at this training and engaging with other mentors in school about the kind of policies and practices that they have in place. This next section is about us trying to reassure you and talk to you a little bit about how things have changed for our students post-COVID-19 restrictions, post-school closure, and what that training looks like for students at the moment at university. So for our existing students, so students going into their second year or their third year with us at the university, we supported them during the lockdown and during school closures and university closures by giving them really focused weeks, delivering virtual sessions on each of the teacher standards. So we hope by doing that, the students will still be really well prepared for coming in on their placements. They've had lots of focused, targeted support. Students have also engaged regularly with their tutors, worked on developing their subject knowledge. So all of that time when they weren't out on placement last year, they still had that targeted support working towards developing the teacher standards. The structure of those placements that they're going into may look slightly different, and we've adjusted the expectations to take into account that some of our students have missed out on time in school. So if you've got a student coming out into SE2 or SE3, a part of the undergraduate course, then the expectations may look slightly different. So the placements are slightly longer, trying to make up some of that time, and they're gradually building up their teaching and their independent whole class teaching a little bit more slowly than you may be used to when you're having an undergraduate 3, for example. Those will all be made clear in the reflective portfolio. All of the expectations are laid out quite clearly there for you to see, but just to be aware that we have taken that into account, and we're really trying to be as flexible as possible and work with you to adapt those expectations to enable you to follow your own procedures, as well as enabling the trainee to make great progress. For all of the students, so our new students and our returning students, they've spent time considering the impact of school closures, thinking about what that's been like for schools, for staff, for parents and pupils and the whole community. Some students have spent the time exploring the idea of the recovery curriculum, and they've got specific health and safety advice and additional guidelines. It's also important to bear in mind that the learning at university at the moment is a blended approach. So they're not having any whole cohort sessions on campus. So we haven't got huge groups of students mixing together on campus, or any whole cohort sessions are all taught online at the moment. Smaller face-to-face groups are timetabled in larger rooms to enable social distancing for the students. Those rooms are fully ventilated and fully sanitised every day. Students are wearing masks around campus as well as in their lectures and in their sessions. So we might have a group of 30 in a lecture theatre that would normally seat 200 to really support that social distancing. And we've got procedures for hand washing across the campus. PGCE 1 placement has been pushed back until the week after the half-term break. So ordinarily we would have hosted a kind of introductory placement for PGCE students in September and early October. We pushed that back, and school colleagues at the steering committee told us that would be helpful. The undergraduate 3 students are in after the Christmas break, so we've moved some of the placements around to try to allow schools that time to be able to adjust. All of the placement briefings that we're doing to students before they come out into school have been extended, and they're including COVID-specific guidance and discussion around the links of that to part 2 of the teacher standards and the recovery curriculum. The PGCE students had a 2-week block of placement preparation this year as we removed that initial placement in September, so they've spent lots of time preparing for placement and understanding what school might look like. The undergraduate 3s and the PGCE students have also had the opportunity to consider the school opening documentation and risk assessments of one of our partnership schools. The head teacher joined us online with children to discuss the new situation within that school, and the children talked about the impact on their working day, and other groups have been able to access that recording. The undergraduate 1 students have had an introductory placement talk already from us as the partnership team, and we've considered the university expectation as well as the situation nationally within schools. And we'll be doing other focus briefings for the UG1s and for the UG2 students this term. We've also introduced a new document which students will have to sign and upload to their ERP. This links to the Student Code of Conduct and means that all of the students must sign to say that they are aware of their responsibilities as adults to keep themselves and colleagues safe. And any breach of that will be taken very seriously and linked to Part 2 of the Teacher Standards. We've introduced virtual tutor visits at the start of placements and mentor training. So we're able to meet with you online in schools. So all of the visits up until Christmas at least will be virtual. So any school experienced tutor coming in to visit your school will do so virtually, and we can arrange that. And we've got lots of flexibility in the way that we arrange that, whether we're able to get you and the student online at the same time or whether we have to see you separately. We're very flexible in that approach. And as I said, we have edited the expectations for students on placement, and we aim to be as flexible as possible to support you with your current policies and procedures. If you've got any questions or concerns about potential situations, or some of your staff are concerned about potential situations, please do get in touch and discuss with us so that we can be flexible and support you. The more you engage with us and tell you about those experiences in school, the more we're going to be able to be flexible and support you. So we want you to feel reassured. We do understand that these are very challenging times for you in school. The students understand that as well, and hopefully all those things that we've put in place will just offer you some reassurance that we are really working to mitigate those risks, and the students understand the role that they play in that as well. The health and safety of our whole partnership community is a real priority for us at the university. Students can obtain lateral flow tests through the university. They can either choose to obtain those through you as a school and part of your measures that you have, or if needed, they can get them at the university. There's no limit to the number of tests that they can access, and we have told all students they're expected to obtain one prior to starting their placement. To prepare students for coming in, we've talked to them a lot about their professionalism and about the COVID-19 secure procedures that schools may have in place, and clearly explained to them that it's part of their professionalism that they follow those. They've all explored the concept of a recovery curriculum, what things might look like in school. They've had the chance to talk to school colleagues about the way that their schools are operating at the moment. They've had specific health and safety advice. They've been given additional guidance and additional talks from us as a partnership team about how they can ensure that they're maintaining the health and safety of our partnership whilst they're working in schools. We're very, very flexible with how we want to work with you, and we've adapted all of the expectations for the students to make sure that they're going to enable trainees to progress whilst working within any additional policies and procedures that you may have in place. One of the main questions that we've had from colleagues in school is how the trainees can support in school at the moment. During any period of school closures, the trainees can very much still be part of your workforce, and they can join in any rota that you've already established with your teaching staff. We've really got a mixed experience at the moment for our trainees, and we're willing to be really flexible and work with you in what's going to support you as a school and support the trainee. The trainees have been told that they are able to support schools by working remotely from home. So they're able to join in with remote learning, whether this is live lessons via an online platform, or whether they're providing resources and work for pupils to be able to engage with at home. Very often, teachers are doing the majority of the planning for these live lessons that are taking place virtually. So what we've said to the trainees is that they can adapt this planning for the group of children that they may be working with, or if they are working physically in school, they can adapt the planning for the group of children that they've got in front of them. And we're asking students to still reflect on that planning, and we're then asking them that they could also reflect on their resources. So if students are involved in preparing resources for remote learning, they can annotate their resources and upload those to their SE folder, just to give them the opportunity to still take part in that really reflective process and to consider the impact that they're having on children's learning. We've put together a kind of meeting the standards grid of opportunities. So each of the teacher standards is broken down in this grid. And I realise it's quite small on here, but we'll send it as an attached document for you, where we're including some ideas of opportunities that trainees may be able to do as part of their experience working and engaging with your school. So some of these are specifically designed for students who are only working remotely, and some of them are for people who are able to physically support working in school, or indeed a combination of the two. And we've included some possible adaptations that they may be able to involve in order to make sure that they're able to support in school in any way that they can. All of these are flexible ideas that we've generated just to support you in school and to support the trainees with being proactive about ensuring that they're able to continue their progress towards meeting the standards. Any ideas can be discussed with their school experienced tutor. If they're finding it difficult to find ways in which they can really demonstrate their progress towards a particular standard, or you're, as the mentor or class teacher in school, are finding it difficult to find ways that they can show you or demonstrate that particular standard, then please do talk to the SE tutor, engage with them, and they can offer further guidance and support and other ideas that may help. So this is just a continuation of that grid, including more opportunities. You will note on here that we have had one about the students being able to offer to run an online club. This may be possible that they can put together a proposal of ways that they could still deliver some sort of co-curricular opportunity for the children. It could be online, it could be a bubble in school, and it could be that they aim to deliver that online at the moment with the possibility of doing it in school once schools are fully reopened again. So considering we've got such variation at the moment with how trainees are able to engage and be part of your school workforce, we've asked them to keep an additional log of their activity. So I've just included an example here, and not all of them will look like this. There's no pro forma or template for the best way to do it, but we've just asked the trainees to keep a record each week of all of the activity that they have done to actively engage with the school. We've asked them to record whether they've worked face-to-face or virtually, and we've asked them to reflect on what they've been doing and include in there how long they've spent on each activity. In this particular case, the student has also started to make their own links to the teacher standards, so you can encourage the trainees to do that, to start building a little bit of that evidence towards how they're able to continue to make this progress towards the teacher standards. This trainee activity log will be uploaded each week into their ERP. There's more guidance on the next few slides about the ERP and how we use that for those of you that haven't used it before. But the students are aware that this needs to be uploaded as part of their weekly review each week. We've asked them to upload it as one of their actions, just so that as a university we can keep a record of how the students have been able to engage each week. The next thing I'd like to talk to you about is PebblePad, which is the system that we use for the electronic reflective portfolio. It's how the students engage in their weekly observations. It's where we record all of the information about their placement. We've structured it via labelled tabs, so they look like this. So you can click on each of those to be able to see the different pages of the portfolio. So it should be fairly simple to navigate. Some of those tabs have a drop-down arrow which will enable you to see other labelled pages. So for example, each of the weeks with the different expectations are part of that drop-down. The expectations of each placement are recorded for each week with boxes to tick so that everyone knows what's been completed. Most students just type in their weekly reflections and press save. So part of each of those weeks as well, at the bottom there is a section for the weekly reflection. the student to record any areas for development, any targets, any actions that they need to do, and they'll type it directly into their ERP. The student will need to share their ERP with you so you can access it, and staff at the university also have access as well, so we can see it in preparation for coming in to do a school visit. In terms of what you need to do with this, the student will send you that link so you can gain access. And then please sit with the student when they're doing their weekly review. So this is what the weekly reflection section looks like. It's really focused on pupil progress. The student should have pre-populated this and drafted it in some way. So they should come having used their initiative and done a draft format, but then you can sit together to complete this. So we've got the what, the so what, and the now what is how we've structured it, asking students to complete each of those boxes. Then they need to consider their strengths and their areas for development. And then there's a section at the bottom for them to put any actions that they need to organise, things that they need to do in order to support them meeting those areas for development. One thing it is useful to do is for you to go back to the previous week to have a look if there's any actions that they've completed, because there's a section for them to put when they've completed something. As part of this process, it's really helpful if you can remind the students to go back and see if they've completed any of their previous actions. Hopefully this should be a supportive element of your role because the student will have completed it in draft format. They shouldn't be coming to it completely blank. They should have some ideas already. Your role is really supporting them in part of that reflection. The students should be coming to their weekly review meeting with their weekly reflection already done in draft form. We have asked the students to take ownership of this and to make sure they've drafted out their weekly reflection. They can then come to their weekly review to use your time to talk with you about things that they're reflecting on, some of the highlights of the week, some of the things they think they've done in order to make progress towards the standards. They should be proactively gathering their own evidence to engage and talk with you about to show that they're meeting the teacher standards. So they might bring with them some examples of children's work, they might bring some assessment that they've done, and you can then look and engage with that meeting standards grid together. The grid is for formative processes in SE1 and SE2, and it's very much used for assessment in SE3, but we would find it useful for that grid to be updated each week throughout all of the school experiences. So the grid can be highlighted just to show the progress that the students are making. And as you're doing that, this will then support with setting targets and actions for the student to continue their professional development. It's really important that these targets that are set are smart and that the students are really aware of what it is that they're focusing on. Again, they should have drafted this already, and we've talked to them about how they can make sure that they're getting the most out of setting those targets and what kind of actions they might need to be able to do whilst they're in school or whilst they're engaged with working with you. But please just support them with reviewing those targets just to make sure that we've got really effective ones in place. Attendance logs need to be kept throughout the students' placements. Obviously, whilst we're working during school closures and you may have periods of time where bubbles are burst and students aren't physically in school, that doesn't matter and it doesn't affect their attendance log too much. What we've asked the students to do is to complete their attendance log each week, and any period of time where they are actively engaged with working for the school, whether that be from home or in school, whether it's preparing their planning and resources from home or doing their PPA from home, that can all be marked as attendance on the attendance log. So any period of time where the student is actively engaged, working, preparing and planning for the school, all counts towards their attendance and can be marked. If there's times where they're not, then the student would need to complete an absence form. Meeting the standards grid, as I said earlier, it sets out each of the teacher's standards, and it's used to enable you and your student to think about progress. For SE1 and SE2, it's target setting. It does not need to be filled in. It looks like this, and you can see it's the identification of the difference the trainee's teaching makes to a pupil's learning, reference to particular standards that should drive the targets set for the trainee. So you can use this to support those targets and encourage the student to use it to think about their targets and their goals. There's no possible way of highlighting part of one of these boxes or one of these statements. So when you click on it, the whole box will be highlighted. So you can't highlight part of it, the whole thing will be highlighted. And you would be doing that during SE3. So you'd click on each of these boxes to choose where the student currently is. Obviously, you can move that as you go through the placement. That's why it's really important that you look at it regularly, particularly during SE3. Subject audits in the professional development section of the ERP, and we're asking the students to complete this to show when they've observed a subject and when they've taught a subject. It doesn't need to be uploads of planning or uploads of observations. It just keeps us a really clear record of what they've had the opportunity to teach and the opportunity to observe. You can use this as a mentor to be able to see if we're trying to find them any additional opportunities. During the period of school closures, we're just asking students to note on there whether any observations or teaching were face-to-face or virtual. So you might see those codes included on there as well. Any observations that you've carried out of the student or the student has carried out of their class teacher or any other teacher will also be uploaded onto the ERP. It's really helpful if they clearly label what those observations are. So they say what subject it was, when it was done, and if it was a lesson that was carried out as an observation by their SE tutor as well as somebody in school. It's really helpful if it's labelled quite clearly that it was an SE tutor observation. The student is responsible for uploading these. They can either be typed documents or it could be a photograph. So if you've handwritten your observation notes for a student, you don't need to type it up or anything. They can take a photograph and upload that. It's just helpful if they check that the photograph is quite clear so that we can actually read the writing when we come to download it. So as I said, the way that we track the progress of trainees and the way that we assess trainees has changed slightly this year. So students on SE1 or SE2 are no longer graded in the same way. So at the end of the placement, what we're doing instead is making a formative judgment of their trajectory towards the teacher standards. This change has come about due to the revalidation of our courses and changes to the Ofsted expectations. So what we're asking for is you to make this judgment as to whether they're on trajectory or not on trajectory to meet the teacher standards by the end of their course. So when we're making that judgment, we need to bear in mind what stage of their course they are in at the moment. Subject knowledge will be considered in the same way. SE tutor visits will still take place at various review points during the placement, but instead of you agreeing and moderating a set of grades, we're talking more about this idea of on trajectory or not on trajectory. Students or trainees in the final placements, when they're on their SE3, they'll be graded using that meeting standards grid that we've looked at already. So that grid will therefore have more sections to it. It will have the emerging, met, embedded and consistently embedded, where you can track the progress of that trainee, exactly where they are against each of the teacher standards. The meeting standards grid does break the standards down into subheadings, but that's just to support progress tracking and to support you identifying areas for development. It doesn't need to be interpreted as separate standards. They shouldn't be interpreted in that way. They're not substandards. They're just subheadings that we're using to support that assessment of the trainees. So if you're doing a final placement student assessment, you will be updating that meeting the standards grid regularly, and that will feed into and support your judgments when you're assessing with the SE tutor at the midpoint and the end point of the placement. SE1 and SE2 don't have that formal assessment process. Instead, we're talking about their trajectory to meet the teacher's standards by the end of their course. Carrying out observations on students should still be observed, ideally teaching at least once a week by the lead mentor or the class teacher. Feedback to the student should hopefully take place as quickly as it can after the lesson, some sort of informal feedback, and they should have at least once a week some formal written feedback. You don't need to watch the whole lesson. You can watch part of a lesson, so you could watch the first 20 minutes and then come out of the lesson and then return at the end in order to assess the student's progress. Each lesson observation should have a clear focus on pupil progress, and they should ideally be linked to a specific weekly target that the student has set as part of those weekly reviews. If it's a joint observation, with either yourself and the class teacher or yourself and an SE tutor coming in, then you can utilise these others' considerable experience. In that case, feedback to the student would still be coming from the class teacher or the lead mentor with support from the SE tutor. And a part of that feedback process should be involving the student and engaging them in discussion about the learning and what they've understood to be the learning that's taking place. So we can really get a good grasp on how the student is analysing the learning that's going on in their lessons. If it's part of a joint observation, the tutor will email all of that documentation to the student after the visit. The student is responsible for uploading any observations onto their ERP. And as I said, it doesn't have to be typed up notes. It can be handwritten in a photograph. That's absolutely fine. So there are some changes to this process whilst schools may be working remotely. SE tutors are not coming into school at the moment to carry out joint observations. Hopefully we'll get back to that point fairly soon, but at the moment observations are just being done by staff in school, and that's fine. The SE tutor may contact you to talk about that observation process. If the student's teaching remotely and it's possible for the SE tutor to join in a remote observation, then we can talk to you about arranging that as well. With regards to the formal weekly observations for students, we'd still like them to be observed as much as they can be and to get that written formal feedback. If the student's teaching remotely, then a class teacher or a lead mentor can observe that lesson remotely, that's fine. If they're in school teaching small groups of children, that's absolutely fine as well. And it doesn't matter if their feedback's coming from different people. I know some schools you're working on rotas at the moment where the student might be observed by different people on different days. That's absolutely fine. Any feedback is really useful for the student to have to be able to upload onto their portfolio. Process for additional and targeted support is now via a personal development action plan. So it's still the same process in that initially, if you do have any concerns about a trainee's progress at any stage on any placement, please do get in touch with the SE tutor. The tutor can do additional visits. Additionally, they may be virtually, obviously, at the moment, but the tutor can do additional visits to talk to you, to talk to the student about exactly what's going on. Please don't be too hard on yourself. Some students do just need that extra little bit of time. The sooner you contact us and get in touch, the easier it's going to be. Please don't let things drift on. If you do have a concern, it's likely to be valid, so please do share it with us so that we can support you and support the student. If the route we go down is via targeted support, we'll be setting really clear targets. So we're limiting that to no more than 3. And those targets do need to be specific and clear. And then we'll work together. So involving the student in crafting their targets. If you are giving targeted support to a student, the student needs to be logged into their ERP in order to record it. So it's really important that it's part of a dialogue and the student is engaged in crafting what their targets will be and talking to you and talking to the SE tutor about what support they might need in order to be able to meet those targets. In SE1 and SE2, those unassessed placements, where we're looking at the trajectory towards the teacher standards, there's no longer that 2-week cut-off. So if at the end of the 2 weeks that you've looked at those 3 initial targets, that student may still need a little bit of extra support or something else in place to support them as part of their personal development plan, that's fine. It doesn't have to be that all support is taken away after the 2 weeks. So there isn't that cut-off as there has been in previous years. Please do, as I said, discuss any concerns that you've got with an SE tutor as early as possible, so that we're there to support at an early stage. It's important to say that if you do have concerns around Part 2 or professionalism of a trainee, that is treated slightly differently in SE1 and SE2. So we do always expect the students to act professionally. If you've got those concerns, get in touch with us as soon as possible. Concerns around Part 2 or professionalism can lead to changes in placement in SE1 or SE2. So even though those are unassessed, we're constantly assessing them around Part 2 and professionalism. All of the students have been told quite clearly that any breach of any COVID-19 guidelines will be a breach of their professionalism and Part 2 of the teacher standards. We've talked to them a lot and spent a lot of time engaging them in understanding their role in mitigating risk, following guidelines and procedures, and any breach of that will be considered a breach of professionalism. And we've talked to them about their professional responsibility there. So the final thing I wanted to say is thank you so much from all of us at the partnership team and the university for continuing to work so positively with all of our trainee teachers. This is an email I received last week after a student had gone into her placement late, having waited for one to become available for her and to find a school that was able to work with her. And you can see that the students are so willing to be back engaging with schools. It's what their absolute passion is to be able to work with children and to be able to engage with your schools. And thank you so much for continuing to make that possible. We understand that things may look a little bit different at the moment in school, and the experience that trainees are having will be very varied. We're very flexible about that, and we understand the pressures that you have been under working in school during these times. So thank you so much for continuing to work with us and to continuing to support us and support our trainees. If you have got any questions or concerns, then please do get in touch with us and we'll do our very best to be able to support you. Thank you.